Hi everyone, welcome to my channel or welcome back. So it's about the middle of February, close to Valentine's Day, and also February is designated in the United States as National Heart Month. So kind of in honor of that, but not really. This video is going to talk about the way that some types of muscular dystrophy can affect the heart. The heart is a muscle, but it's a different kind of muscle than skeletal muscle, which is what we use to move different parts of our body. And some types of muscular dystrophy can affect cardiac muscle in the heart, as well as skeletal muscle, but other kinds do not affect the heart at all. So that's one reason that it's important to determine, if possible, genetically, what type of muscular dystrophy you have. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the background of cardiac versus skeletal muscle, what some genetic types of muscular dystrophy, whether they affect cardiac or skeletal or both, and then give you a reference on a really excellent video at the end. So thank you for joining us. Skeletal muscle, which is the type of muscle that we use to move our bodies, and cardiac muscle, which is the type of muscle found in our heart, have similarities, but they also have a number of differences. And this is a listing of some of the more important differences between skeletal and cardiac muscle. So in skeletal muscle, it's composed of fibers, and each fiber is made up of a large number of individual muscle cells which are joined together. So one fiber may have hundreds or thousands of different cell nuclei that are all in one giant cell. By contrast, cardiac muscle is made up of individual cells which, depending on what type of animal you're looking at, usually have one or two nuclei per individual cells. Now the cells are sort of joined together by these special structures which allow electrical signals to pass from one cell to the next, which is very important to allow them to contract in a coordinated fashion for the heart to be an efficient pump, which is the next distinction between skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle doesn't generally contract by itself. It gets stimulated by an electrical signal from neurons when we decide to, contract a muscle in some part of our body. Cardiac muscle, on the other hand, we don't have to, send a signal, once every second roughly to make our heart beat. Cardiac muscle actually contracts on its own, and it needs to contract in a coordinated fashion. So there's a particular part of our heart which sort of regulates the heart rate. Okay, so skeletal muscle, if it's damaged, which it can be because it's doing a lot, exerting forces, and it can repair the muscle fibers by growing new fibers from satellite cells. And that's one of the hallmarks of muscular dystrophy. There's a lot of signs that you see on a biopsy of new fibers being formed because the old fibers tend to be prone to damage. Now, cardiac muscle doesn't repair damage very well. You lose some cardiac muscle, you generally can't grow it back. Cardiac and skeletal muscle share a number of the different muscle proteins, and this includes some of the proteins that are mutated or absent in different types of muscular dystrophy. This has a listing. I'll go back to it in more detail later. But you see a number of the proteins that are involved in muscular dystrophy are also expressed in the heart. So some types of muscular dystrophy, but not others, tend to have involvement of the heart muscle. What kind of cardiac problems can be found in muscular dystrophy? Well, you can have cardiomyopathy, which is really just a dystrophy of the heart muscle. And there's two general types, dilated and hypertrophic. Dilated, the heart gets larger and the muscle walls around the heart tend to get thinner, and the heart isn't able to contract as well and doesn't pump as efficiently. Now, in contrast, there's another called hypertrophic. It's kind of the opposite in that the muscles around on the exterior of the heart get thicker and they're less flexible than usual, but both types actually make the heart a less efficient pump. Now, in addition, some particular types of muscular dystrophy can cause electrical conduction defects. Remember, the heart, all of the different parts of the heart have to contract in a coordinated manner for it to pump blood. And when this doesn't happen, that's when you have an arrhythmia. And arrhythmias are associated with a few particular types of muscular dystrophy. So a couple specific examples. First, I'll talk about limb girdle muscular dystrophy 2A or R1, and the protein for that is calpain-3. Now, it turns out calpain-3 is not expressed in the heart muscle at all, and therefore having a mutation that prevents you from making calpain-3 shouldn't have any effect on the heart. So there shouldn't be any cardiomyopathy associated with LGMD 2A R1. And that's true. It turns out that in trying to work on gene therapy for this particular type, one of the problems is that if the calpain gene that is being delivered by gene therapy is expressed in the heart, that actually causes a toxicity issue. So the researchers working on gene therapy have had to come up ways to make sure that calpain-3 isn't expressed in the heart. Now, in contrast, to some extent, in dysferlin, which is the gene for LGMD R2 or 2B, dysferlin is expressed in the heart as well as in skeletal muscle. However, while not having it in skeletal muscle, definitely causes an impact, not having it in the heart doesn't really seem to cause much of a problem. This is a paper that actually came out just a few days ago, reporting on heart as well as lung function in LGMD 2B/R2. And their conclusion is that impaired left ventricle function, cardiomyopathy, was comparable to that of the general population, who doesn't have muscular dystrophy. And then further, periodic cardiac review is probably not warranted unless prompted by symptoms or abnormal data findings. So, it's, there are isolated cases where there can be heart effects, but it doesn't seem to be a very prominent feature of the disease, even though a healthy person normally has a lot of dysferlin in their heart. Now, talking about titin, which is the protein responsible for LGMD 2J or R10. Titin is kind of a major structural protein of both cardiac and skeletal muscle, although the types, there's different versions of the protein in heart than in skeletal muscle, and depending on exactly which mutation a person has, they can have only their heart affected, they can have only skeletal muscle affected, or they can have both heart and skeletal muscle affected. This is a figure, showing, a few mutations. It turns out titin is a huge gene. It has a very large number of mutations. We're only beginning to get a clear picture of it. It turns out its effect on the heart is actually better understood than its effect on skeletal muscle. But it's known that, different mutations, they might only affect a portion of the gene that is only included in the versions of titin expressed in the heart, or only in skeletal muscle, or sometimes in both. And then I want to talk a little bit about the conduction defects. And this is in the gene laminin AC, abbreviated LMNA, which is LGMD 1B, or it's alternately referred to as a type of autosomal dominant Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy. And heart involvement and particular conduction defects are very common in this type of muscular dystrophy. And the primary risk to a person's life is if their heart goes into arrhythmia. So very often they are given either a pacemaker or a defibrillator to control this. Okay, so to summarize, looking at different types of muscular dystrophy, some of the proteins are expressed in the heart, a few are not, so you wouldn't expect there to be any cardiac effects if the protein isn't even expressed in the heart. And then other types, the protein is expressed in the heart, but there are rarely symptoms. And even among the sarcoglycanopathies, which are LGMD 2, C, D, E, and F, for some reason, people with mutations in alpha sarcoglycan, even though it's expressed in the heart, along with the other sarcoglycans, people with alpha sarcoglycan mutations are less likely to have heart issues, and they're less likely to be severe than people with other subtypes. Okay, and kind of the take-home point is that because heart disease is a very common thing, there are a lot of heart drugs available, and they are applicable to people with heart issues due to muscular dystrophy. Unlike for diseases of skeletal muscle, which don't really have much in the way of treatments, cardiac issues from MD are treatable. but it works best if they're treated early before someone has severe symptoms, which means that it's very important to know, if possible, which subtype of LGMD a person has, or which type of MD that a person has, and what their cardiac risks might be, and to be monitored to, keep ahead of any heart issues, and if they are starting to appear, to start treatment early. Now, this is a very brief overview, and in the notes I'm going to refer you to a presentation given by Elizabeth McNally, who is an MD researcher and also a cardiologist at Northwestern University. And she gave a presentation at the 2021 International LGMD Conference, and that's a really good source of information, goes into a lot more detail than I have here. If you're interested in learning more, and also what maybe you should do personally, I recommend this as an excellent source. So thank you for watching.